Good evening, traveller. Tonight, you are welcome to rest here for a long while as several gentle tales unfold through the night. The first story I wish to share is about a knight who came to the magical forest of Whispergrove, believing he had come to reclaim something that was rightfully his. In time, he discovered the forest had other plans. So settle in and let us gently unfold the first story of the night. There are evenings in Whispergrove when the forest seems to draw itself inward, not in retreat, not in fear, but in quiet preparation, as though the day has said all it intends to say, and the night is being given space to answer in its own time. It was during such an evening that the night came looking for me. The light had begun its slow descent through the trees, no longer falling from above so much as slipping sideways between trunks and branches. Shadows lengthened and softened at their edges, overlapping one another until it became difficult to tell where one ended and the next began. The air held the faint coolness that arrives just before dusk, carrying with it the scent of leaf mould, stone, and the last warmth stored in bark and soil. I was walking the lower path near the western ridge, a route I often take when the day grows tired. It is a forgiving trail, wide enough to wander without attention, and familiar enough that my feet rarely need instruction. In the evenings I find it listens particularly well. I had paused near a stand of ferns to set a small bundle at the base of a tree, dried roots bound in twine, left for creatures who know how to find such things, when I heard the horse. Its approach was unhurried, the sound of hooves muted by the soft ground. Not the sharp rhythm of pursuit, nor the careless noise of someone unfamiliar with the forest, but the measured cadence of an animal that had learned to place its steps where they would be received. I turned slightly, resting my weight against my staff, and waited. The horse emerged first, broad-shouldered and steady, its coat darkened by travel and evening light alike. A knight followed at its side, walking rather than riding, one hand loosely holding the reins. His armour was practical, worn smooth in places where use had polished it over time. No sigils adorned it, no bright markings to announce allegiance or rank. This was not a man seeking to be seen. When he noticed me, he stopped at once. He did not reach for his sword. He did not straighten in alarm. He simply inclined his head, as one does when encountering someone unexpectedly, but without hostility. "I was told you walk these paths," he said. His voice was calm, though there was an edge to it, not fear, but the careful restraint of someone who has already tried and failed to solve a problem alone. "I walk many of them," I replied. "This one happens to be beneath my feet tonight." He considered this, then nodded. "Then perhaps I have found the right person." The forest settled around us, the sounds of the day continuing their gradual withdrawal. Somewhere deeper among the trees a bird called once, then fell silent. The light dimmed another degree, the air growing more still. "My name is not important," the knight said, "but I was told that if something is misplaced in Whispergrove, you may know where to look." "Misplaced things are often exactly where they intend to be," I said. "It is people who have trouble finding them." A faint smile touched his mouth at that, though it did not last. "Then I hope it intends to be found," he said, "because it does not belong to the forest." "What is it you are missing?" I asked. He hesitated, then reached beneath the edge of his breastplate. From within he withdrew a small leather cord, its end empty. He held it out to me without explanation. "A ring," he said, "plain, unmarked. It was here when I entered the wood. When I reached the ridge beyond the stream, it was gone." I studied the cord. The leather was worn but cared for, softened by long contact with skin. This was not an ornament carried thoughtlessly. "You returned to look for it," I said. "I did," he replied, "twice." "And did you find where it fell?" "I found where it stopped," he said, "but not where it went." That distinction mattered. I nodded once. "Show me." We walked together, the night matching his pace to mine without comment. His horse followed easily, ears turning now and then to catch sounds that never quite resolved into anything demanding attention. The forest made room for us, not widening its paths, but not narrowing them either. As we moved deeper, evening took firmer hold. The last of the sun slipped away, leaving behind a pale, lingering glow caught in the higher leaves. The ground darkened beneath our feet, and the air cooled enough that breath became faintly visible when exhaled slowly. "This is where I noticed it was missing," the knight said at last, stopping near a shallow rise where the path curved inward. I felt the cord shift. When I looked, it was gone. I knelt, running my fingers lightly over the ground. Moss, leaf litter, small stones warmed earlier by the sun, and now giving that warmth back reluctantly. There were signs of passage, boot prints, the heavier mark of hooves, but nothing disturbed enough to suggest a struggle or sudden loss. "You did not drop it," I said. "No," he agreed, "it was taken." The forest did not deny this. We continued on, moving slowly now, attention tuned not to speed but to subtle absence. In Whispergrove, what is missing often leaves a clearer trail than what remains. It was the horse who found it first. The animal stopped without instruction, lowering its head toward a cluster of roots exposed near the base of a stone outcropping, rememberable more for its shape than its size. The knight stepped closer, following the horse's gaze. There, nestled against the cool curve of stone, lay the ring, unbroken, untarnished, exactly as it had been. Relief crossed the knight's face, brief and genuine. He took a step forward, then stopped. Something else occupied the space now. At first, it was only the shape, a broad coil of shadow and scale that had not been there moments before, or perhaps had been and simply gone unnoticed. Then came the warmth, radiating outward in slow, steady pulses. Then the sound, a deep rhythmic breathing that seemed to rise from the earth itself. A dragon slept there. It was not large in the way songs describe such creatures, but it was vast enough to command the clearing. Its body curved protectively around the stone, tail wrapped close, wings folded with careful precision. One forelimb rested near the ring, claws half curled, not grasping but undeniably present. The dragon's hide was the color of old embers, darkened and matte, catching the faintest glimmer of remaining light along the ridges of its scales. Each breath it drew warmed the air, carrying with it the scent of smoke long cooled and something mineral like rain on heated rock. The night froze. It did not snarl. It did not stir. It slept. Slowly, carefully, the night leaned closer to me. "It wasn't here before," he whispered. "It was," I said quietly. "You simply had no reason to see it." His gaze flicked back to the ring, so close now that he could have reached it in a single step. His fingers tightened at his side. "I can take it," he said, "if I am careful." He shifted his weight forward, placing one foot with deliberate care. The ground gave slightly beneath his boot. The dragon's breathing changed, not faster, not louder, just aware. One eye, still closed, moved beneath its lid. A low sound rumbled in its chest, not a growl but the deep murmur of a creature adjusting within sleep. I reached out and caught the knight's wrist. "Not yet," I said. He looked at me, tension held carefully behind his eyes. "It is mine." "And it will remain so," I replied, "if we do not wake the one who is borrowing it." He exhaled slowly, drawing back. "Then what do we do?" I studied the dragon, noting the slow rise and fall of its flank, the relaxed curl of its claws, the way its tail rested with unconscious care around the stone. "It is not guarding," I said. "It is resting." "That makes little difference if it wakes," he said. "On the contrary," I replied, "it makes all the difference." I released his wrist and turned away, already scanning the surrounding forest. "Stay here," I said, "and do not move." The knight hesitated, then nodded. I walked back along the path we had taken, listening not for danger, but for invitation. Evening had settled fully now, the forest alive with the quiet activity of creatures preparing for night. Somewhere nearby, something sweet had ripened enough to be noticed. I intended to find it. The forest receives an evening search differently than one conducted by day. Light no longer insists on showing everything at once. Instead, it allows details to emerge gradually, offering them only when approached with patience. I moved away from the clearing without haste, letting my steps remain unremarkable. Creatures that sleep lightly notice urgency long before they notice sound, and I had no wish to be noticed at all. The path curved gently downward, following a shallow hollow where the soil stayed warm longer than most places. Such pockets often hold what is needed when night begins to settle in earnest. It did not take long to find signs. The air grew faintly sweet, threaded with a scent that did not belong to leaves or bark. I followed it past a fallen log and into a small depression where the ground dipped enough to collect runoff after rain. There, nestled among low plants whose broad leaves trapped the last of the day's warmth, I found a cluster of fire fruit. They are not common, but they are known to Whispergrove. Round and heavy in the hand, their skin dull red and faintly warm to the touch, they carry a slow-burning sweetness that lingers long after they are eaten. Deer avoid them, birds ignore them. Larger creatures, however, remember them well. I knelt and gathered several, careful not to take too many. Balance is not maintained by excess. When I rose, I wrapped them loosely in a scrap of cloth and began my return. The forest had grown quieter in my absence, as it often does when something important is unfolding elsewhere. The hush was not empty, it was attentive. When I reached the clearing again, nothing had changed. The dragon still slept, coiled protectively around the stone. Its breathing remained slow and steady, the warmth it gave off pooling gently around it like an unseen hearth. The knight stood where I had left him, unmoving, his attention fixed on the ring as though willing it to lift itself in return. He glanced at me as I approached, relief flickering briefly across his face. "You were not long," he murmured. "I found what I was looking for," I replied. I did not approach the dragon directly. Instead, I knelt several paces away and placed one of the fruits on the ground, letting it rest there openly. The scent drifted outward at once, subtle but unmistakable. The dragon's breathing shifted. A low, contented sound resonated through its chest, barely audible but felt all the same. One wing flexed slightly, the membrane stretching and settling again. Still, its eyes remained closed. I placed another fruit beside the first, then another, forming a small offering rather than a trail. There was no need to lure, only to suggest. Slowly the dragon stirred, its head lifted a fraction, nostrils flaring as it drew in the air. One eye opened, revealing a deep molten gold, unfocused with sleep. It blinked once, then again, awareness returning in gentle increments. It did not rise. Instead, it shifted its weight, stretching forward just enough to bring its head closer to the offering. A long tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Another quiet rumble sounded, this one distinctly pleased. I waited. Patience is not something one demonstrates to be admired. It is something offered so that others may decide what to do with it. The dragon lowered its head and nudged the fruit gently, testing it before taking it into its mouth. The sound it made then was unmistakable, a low, satisfied hum that vibrated through the ground and into my bones. As it ate, its body loosened. The tight coil around the stone relaxed, tail uncurving slightly, one forelimb shifting away from where it had rested. The ring was no longer encircled. I did not look at the night. I did not need to. When the dragon's attention settled fully on the food, I lifted my hand and made a small, open gesture toward the stone. The knight moved. He stepped forward with care, each footfall deliberate, his breathing slow and controlled. He did not rush. He did not crouch. He simply walked, as one does when crossing a space that belongs temporarily to someone else. The dragon noticed him. Its eye followed his movement, alert now but not alarmed. Its head tilted slightly, assessing. Another low sound rumbled in its chest, neither warning nor welcome, only acknowledgement. The knight paused, placing one hand flat against his chest in a small, instinctive gesture of respect. Then he reached down and lifted the ring. Nothing happened, no roar, no sudden movement. The dragon watched, chewing thoughtfully, its gaze calm. The knight straightened, the ring closed securely in his palm. He stepped back slowly, retreating to where I stood. Only then did the dragon settle again, curling its body more comfortably around the warmth of the stone and the last of the fruit. Its eye closed once more, and its breathing resumed its earlier rhythm. The clearing exhaled. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then the knight let out a breath he had clearly been holding for some time. He opened his hand and looked at the ring, turning it once between his fingers as though to reassure himself of its solidity. "I thought it had chosen the dragon," he said quietly. "Perhaps it did," I replied. "For a while." He frowned slightly. "Why?" I considered the question before answering. "Some creatures are drawn to things that have been worn close to the heart," I said. "They recognize the warmth of them." The knight nodded slowly. He slipped the ring back onto its cord and secured it beneath his armor once more. This time his hand lingered there for a moment, palm pressed lightly against his chest. "I am grateful," he said. "I would not have known what to do." "You knew what not to do," I replied. "That is often enough." We did not linger longer than necessary. The dragon slept on, content and undisturbed. The forest resumed its quiet evening rhythms, the brief tension dissolving as though it had never been. We walked back the way we had come, the path seeming clearer now, less inclined to wander. Night had settled fully, stars beginning to appear in the open spaces between branches. The air cooled steadily, carrying with it the deep, clean scent of earth at rest. After a time the knight spoke again. "You did not fear it," he said. "The dragon." "No," I replied. "I respected it." He considered this. "Is there a difference?" "There is all the difference," I said. He smiled faintly, not in amusement but in understanding. When we reached the edge of Whispergrove, the forest shifted subtly, releasing us without ceremony. The path widened, the trees stepping back just enough to signal that our business there was finished. The knight stopped and turned to face me. "I will remember this," he said, "not only what you did, but how." "That is the part worth keeping," I said. He inclined his head once more, then mounted his horse. As he rode away, the sound of hooves gradually softened, blending into the night until it became indistinguishable from the forest's own quiet movements. I remained where I was for a time, listening. Somewhere behind me, deeper within Whispergrove, a dragon slept, warm and undisturbed. The ring had returned to where it belonged. Nothing had been taken, nothing had been lost. The forest settled, satisfied. At last I turned and began my own walk home, letting the night decide how far I would go. There are things in Whispergrove that are not guarded by force. They are kept by trust, returned by patience, and found only when one is willing to ask for help in the quiet way. Those are the things worth seeking. There are mornings in Whispergrove when the forest feels watchful, not alert, not wary, simply attentive, as though it has noticed something new and is deciding how much attention it deserves. On one such morning I was walking a path I had taken many times before, guided more by memory than intention. The light was soft, filtered through the upper branches in pale ribbons that drifted slowly as the leaves shifted. Dew clung to the moss, and every step released the faint, clean scent of damp earth and pine resin. I had not set out with a destination in mind. In Whispergrove, that is often an invitation rather than a mistake. The forest is more willing to meet you halfway when you do not insist on knowing where you are going. It was the horse that I noticed first. It stood a short distance off the path, its head lowered, one hind leg bent in rest. The animal was tall and broad through the chest, its coat dulled with travel, and its tack worn but well cared for. A knight's horse, without question. It breathed slowly, calmly, as though it had been standing there for some time. Horses do not linger in Whispergrove without reason. I slowed my pace but did not stop. Sudden attention can feel like a challenge in the forest, and I had no wish to disturb whatever balance had allowed the animal to rest so peacefully. As I passed, the horse lifted its head and watched me with a dark, steady eye. It did not shy, it did not stamp or snort. It simply observed, then lowered its head again. Only then did I see the man. He lay on the ground a few steps beyond the horse, his back against the wide trunk of an oak. His armor was plain but well fitted, the kind worn by someone who expected to use it rather than display it. A sword rested beside him, sheathed and carefully placed within reach, though his hand did not touch it now. His helm sat on the ground near his boots, turned on its side to catch the light. He was asleep, not collapsed, not unconscious, simply asleep, the deep, unguarded rest of someone who had reached the end of what the day demanded and found no reason to push further. I stopped then. For a long moment, I stood where the path narrowed, listening. The forest held its breath in the way it does when a story pauses, Birds shifted quietly in the branches. Somewhere deeper in the trees, water moved over stone. The night's breathing was slow and even, his chest rising beneath the dull sheen of steel. I did not wake him. There are few things ruder in Whispergrove than interrupting a rest the forest itself seems to have approved. Instead, I stepped off the path and settled against a nearby tree, lowering myself carefully until I sat on the moss-covered ground. I rested my staff across my knees and waited. Time passes differently when one waits with intention. Minutes stretch, soften, and fold in on themselves. The light shifted again, and the dew began to lift from the ground in faint threads. Eventually, the night stirred. It began with a small movement, a shift of weight, as though he were adjusting to a dream. His brow furrowed, and his hand reached instinctively toward his sword before stopping short. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharp with sudden awareness. He sat up at once, alert and silent. His gaze found me almost immediately. We regarded one another across the small space between us, neither speaking. He did not reach for his weapon, though his posture remained guarded. I inclined my head slightly, not in greeting exactly, but in acknowledgement. "You may continue resting," I said at last. "I was only passing through." He studied me for a moment longer, then let out a breath he had likely not realized he was holding. His shoulders lowered a fraction. "I did not expect to find anyone out here," he said. His voice was steady, though tired around the edges, much less someone who looks so at ease. "This forest encourages familiarity," I replied. "Sometimes more than one expects." He glanced around, taking in the trees, the way the light moved, the quiet that pressed close without feeling oppressive. "So, I've noticed." He rose to his feet, moving with care. The stiffness in his joints was subtle but present, the kind that comes from long hours in armor and longer hours on alert. He retrieved his helm and brushed a few leaves from its rim before tucking it beneath his arm. "I must apologize," he said. "I did not mean to fall asleep." "You needed it," I said simply. He gave a short, almost embarrassed laugh. "That much is true." The horse shifted then, stepping closer at the sound of his voice. The knight rested a gloved hand against its neck, and the animal leaned into the touch with quiet trust. "I am on patrol," he said, more to explain than to boast. "Or I was. My duty is to ensure that nothing crosses into these woods that should not be here." I looked at him then, really looked. There was no arrogance in his bearing, no hunger for recognition, only a deep, practiced sense of responsibility. "And yet," I said, "you are quite far from the edges." He nodded, his expression tightening. "That is the trouble. The paths did not behave as I expected. Each time I thought I was circling back, I found myself deeper in. My markers led me nowhere. Even my horse grew uncertain. At this the horse flicked an ear, as if in mild agreement. "The forest does that," I said, "especially to those who walk it with a task heavy on their shoulders." He looked at me sharply then. "You know this place?" "I have walked it a long time." He hesitated, then inclined his head in return. "Then perhaps you can tell me how to leave." I considered him for a moment before answering. "That depends," I said, "on whether Whispergrove is finished with you." He frowned, not in fear, but in thought. "I cannot linger," he said. "There is someone waiting for me beyond these trees." His voice softened on the words. "My wife," he added after a pause. "I promised her that when I returned from this patrol, I would bring her a gift. The finest flower I could find, something worthy of the wait." I did not comment at once. Promises carry weight here. The forest listens closely when they are spoken aloud. "She has always loved flowers," he continued, "even as a child. She keeps them pressed in books, dried and careful, as though she might one day read them again. I thought this would be simple, a small thing, carried home." He shook his head slightly, a rueful smile touching his mouth. I did not expect to lose myself instead. "Whispergrove is not unkind," I said, "but it does have a way of rearranging priorities." He studied me again, then exhaled slowly. "If you are willing," he said, "I would be grateful for your guidance, even part of the way." I rose, planting my staff in the earth and leaning into it briefly as I stood. "Walk with me," I said. "We will see what the forest offers." We set off together at an unhurried pace, the knight adjusting his stride to match mine. The horse followed without prompting, its hooves careful on the soft ground. For a while we walked in silence, the kind that does not demand filling. After some time the knight spoke again. "You do not seem surprised to find me here." "I am not," I said. "Whispergrove often draws those who stand watch for others. It is curious about them." "And what is it curious about in me?" I glanced at him sideways. "Whether you are guarding the forest," I said, "or guarding something else." He did not answer at once. His gaze drifted ahead, thoughtful. "I suppose," he said slowly, "I have been guarding my promise more than anything." We continued on, the path narrowing and widening in gentle rhythms. Sunlight gave way to shade, then returned again, dappled and warm. The forest did not resist our passage, but neither did it hurry us along. At length the knight slowed. His attention had caught on something just off the path. A faint shift in color among the greens and browns. He stepped closer, kneeling carefully. A flower grew there, small but vivid, its petals a deep blue edged with silver. It seemed to hold the light rather than reflect it. His breath caught. "That," he said softly, "that would be perfect." He reached out, hesitated, then plucked it cleanly from the stem. The moment it left the earth, its color dulled. Not dramatically, not all at once. The silver edge faded first, then the blue softened into something gray and lifeless. By the time he drew his hand back, the flower hung limp between his fingers. He stared at it, confusion crossing his face. "I don't understand," he said. It belonged where it was," I said gently. He closed his hand around the stem, then opened it again, as though hoping the change might reverse itself. It did not. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. At last he lowered his hand. "Is this the forest's answer, then?" he asked quietly. "That I cannot take what I came for?" "It is an answer," I said. "Not always the one we expect." He rose slowly, his shoulders heavier than before. "Then I will have to find another way to keep my promise." We walked on. The forest thickened ahead, the air cooling as the light thinned. Somewhere deeper within, something waited, patient, unhurried, and very old. Whispergrove was not finished with him yet. We walked for some time after that without speaking. The forest grew denser, the trees standing closer together, as though they had quietly agreed to listen more carefully. The air cooled, carrying with it the scent of wet stone and something faintly sweet, like crushed leaves after rain. The night steps had slowed, not from fatigue alone, but from thought. I could see it in the way his gaze lingered on the ground ahead, as though he were weighing each footfall. At last he spoke. "If the forest will not let me take the flower," he said, "then what remains of my promise?" I did not answer right away. Whispergrove rarely responds well to questions asked too sharply. Instead, I let the silence stretch, allowing the forest to settle around us. "Why did you promise her a flower?" I asked instead. He considered the question. "Because she loves them," he said. "Because she finds meaning in small, living things. And because I wanted to return with something that proved I had thought of her while I was gone." "Proved," I repeated softly. He nodded. "I thought a flower would be enough." The path bent gently, leading us toward lower ground. The light shifted again, growing softer, more diffuse. Ahead the forest opened just slightly, the trees stepping back as if to make room for something that had been waiting a long time. I think, I said slowly, that the forest is less concerned with proof than with truth. He looked at me then, curiosity overtaking his frustration. And what truth is that? That you kept your promise the moment you carried it with you, I said. Not when you returned with something in your hands. We emerged into a small glade. It was not grand nor immediately striking. There were no towering stones, no rushing water, no sudden burst of colour. At first glance, it seemed almost empty. A shallow dip in the earth, ringed by old trees whose roots curved protectively around the space. The ground was thick with moss, soft and undisturbed. The knight slowed, his breath catching slightly. "There's something here," he said. "Yes," I replied. "This is a listening place." We stepped forward together, careful not to disturb the quiet. As we moved deeper into the glade, the air changed. It grew warmer, carrying a faint hum beneath the silence, like a breath held just below hearing. At the center of the clearing, a single flower grew. It was unlike the one he had tried to take before, taller, steadier. Its petals were pale gold, veined with soft green, and they curved inward slightly, as though protecting something precious at their heart. Light gathered around it rather than upon it, giving the impression that it was lit from within. The knight stopped a few steps away. He did not reach for it. "I have never seen anything like it," he said quietly. "This flower blooms only when someone arrives carrying a promise they have not yet understood," I said. "It does not belong to the forest alone." He swallowed. "May I?" I shook my head gently. "You may approach, but you must not take it." He nodded, accepting this without protest. Slowly, he knelt beside the flower. The ground beneath him did not compress as one might expect. Instead, it seemed to hold him easily, as though it had been waiting. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, very slowly, the flower leaned toward him. Its petals parted just enough to reveal a soft glow at its center. The light did not spill outward. It remained contained, steady, and calm. The knight's breath grew shallow. "It's warm," he murmured, "like standing near a hearth." I watched closely. Whispergrove reveals much in moments like this if one knows where to look. "What did you promise her?" I asked. "That I would return," he said at once. "That I would come back safely. That I would bring her something beautiful." "And which of those do you fear breaking?" I asked. He was silent for a long time. "At night," he said finally, "when I am on patrol, I think of her waiting. I think of her listening for my steps, and I worry that one day I will not return at all, that the flower would be all she has left of me." The glow within the flower brightened slightly, then settled. I rested my staff against the earth. "Then the flower was never meant to be a thing," I said. It was meant to be a moment. The knight reached out, not to pluck, but to rest his open palm just beside the stem. The flower did not wilt. It did not fade. Instead, its petals trembled, and a faint shimmer rose from them, like mist caught in moonlight. Images formed within the light. A small cottage, sun-warmed and modest. A woman at a table pressing flowers carefully between the pages of a book. Her memory of him not as a knight in armor, but as a man laughing softly as he entered the door, travel-worn and whole. The knight gasped softly. His shoulders shook once, then steadied. "I see," he whispered. The images faded, leaving only the quiet glow of the flower. When he rose, his movements were slower, more deliberate. Something had settled within him, finding its place at last. "I do not need to take it," he said. "Do I?" "No," I replied. "But you will carry it with you all the same." The flower leaned back, its petals closing gently. The light dimmed, but did not vanish. It remained, waiting for the next promise to arrive. We left the glade without looking back. The forest shifted as we walked, the paths growing clearer, less insistent. The air warmed again, and shafts of sunlight found their way through the canopy with renewed confidence. Before long, the night slowed, then stopped. "I recognize this," he said. "This path. It leads out." "It always did," I said. "You simply needed to walk it without trying to take anything from the forest." He turned to me, his expression open and unguarded. "I do not know how to thank you." I smiled faintly. "You already have." The horse stepped forward, snorting softly, as though eager to be moving again. The knight rested his hand against its neck, then hesitated. "Will I see you again?" he asked. "Whispergrove remembers those who listen," I said. "That is often enough." He nodded, then did something unexpected. He removed his helm and set it gently on the ground between us. From within it, he drew a small folded scrap of cloth. He opened it carefully. Inside lay the withered blue flower he had taken earlier. "I will leave this here," he said, "not as a gift, but as a reminder." He placed it at the base of a tree, where moss already began to creep toward it. The forest did not object. He mounted his horse and turned toward the path, pausing once more. "I will return with empty hands," he said, "but a full heart." "That," I said, "is the finest offering there is." He rode on, the sound of hooves fading into the distance until it became indistinguishable from the forest's own quiet movements. I remained where I was for a while after he left, listening. The glade behind us held its light. The paths rested in their places. Whispergrove settled satisfied. At last I turned and continued my walk, letting the forest decide how far I would go. Some promises, I have learned, are not meant to be carried home. They are meant to be lived. There are nights in the magical forest when I walk without purpose. Not toward a destination, not away from anything, just walking, letting the forest decide how far I should go. On one such night, the air was cool and kind. Mist lingered near the ground, curling gently round roots and stones. The stars were faint behind the canopy, their light filtering down in thin, silvery strands. I had been walking for some time when I sensed it. Not a sound, not a movement, a presence. It was far behind me at first, just beyond the edge of certainty. Each time I slowed, it slowed. Each time I stopped, it stopped too. When I listened carefully, I could hear the faintest shift of weight against the forest floor, slow and deliberate. I did not turn around. In the magical forest of Whispergrove, some things reveal themselves more clearly when you allow them to remain unseen. For several nights, it was the same. I would walk a familiar path, and somewhere behind me, always at a respectful distance, the presence followed. It never hurried. It never tried to catch up. It moved as though time itself weighed heavier upon it. I began to adjust my pace without meaning to. My steps grew slower, my pauses longer. I found myself stopping more often, resting my hand against a tree, listening to the forest breathe. Each time I stopped, the presence stopped as well. There was comfort in that. Not companionship yet, just rhythm. One evening, as I rested near a bend in the path, I felt the ground shift slightly behind me. I glanced sideways, careful not to startle whatever had been walking with me. That was when I saw it. The slokin stood among the trees, tall and broad, its shape softened by layers of moss and bark-like skin. It walked upright on two legs, its movements unhurried and thoughtful, as though each step required careful consideration. Its arms hung long at its sides, heavy but gentle. Its face was simple and calm, with deep-set eyes that reflected the forest light like still pools of water. It did not look frightened, nor did it look curious in the way most creatures do. It simply watched. We stood like that for a long moment, neither of us moving. The forest seemed to lean in slightly, interested but unalarmed. Slowly I inclined my head. Not as greeting exactly, more as acknowledgement. The slokin did not respond in kind. Instead, it shifted its weight and took a single careful step closer. Then it stopped again. That was enough. From that night on, we walked together, not side by side, not even close, but always along the same path, always at the same pace. If I stopped, it stopped. If I rested, it waited. Sometimes I spoke softly, commenting on the night or the feel of the air. Other times I said nothing at all. The slokin never answered, but it never left. I began to notice something else as the nights passed. The slokin often lingered near a certain place in the forest. It was a small clearing, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. The ground dipped gently there, forming a shallow hollow surrounded by thick moss and low roots. It felt like a place meant for rest. Each time we passed, the slokin would slow even further. It would step into the hollow and stand there, its hands brushing lightly against the edges of the space. Then it would step back out and wait for me. At first, I thought it was simply habit. But habits, I have learned, often hide questions. One night, instead of continuing on, I stopped at the edge of the clearing. The slokin halted a short distance away, watching quietly. I stepped into the hollow and felt it immediately. The ground was uneven. A massive ancient root had shifted over time, sliding down into the resting place and blocking much of the space. It was too heavy to move without effort, too awkward for someone with long arms and careful balance. The slokin approached slowly and reached out, touching the root with deliberate patience. It pressed gently, then released. It did this again and again, each movement calm, never forceful. It was not trying to move the root, it was showing me. I rested my hand against the wood and nodded softly. "I see," I said, though the word felt unnecessary. Using my staff for leverage, I worked carefully, shifting the root inch by inch. I did not rush. The forest does not like haste. When the root finally moved enough to clear the hollow, I stepped back and let the slokin approach. It lowered itself into the space slowly, settling its weight into the moss. For the first time since I had known it, the slokin did not rise again immediately. It rested. We stayed there for a long while that night. The slokin remained in the hollow, still and content. I sat nearby, leaning against a tree, letting the quiet settle around us. There was no ceremony, no celebration, just relief. When at last the slokin rose and we continued walking, the distance between us had changed. It followed a little closer now. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel. I did not know then how important that would become. After that night, the forest felt different, not changed exactly. Whispergrove rarely changes all at once. It settles instead, like a thought finally finding its place. The path beneath my feet remained the same. The trees stood where they always had, and the stars still found their way through the canopy in familiar patterns. And yet something had eased. The slokin continued to walk with me on the nights that followed. It no longer lingered quite so far behind. The distance between us shortened, slowly, naturally, as though it were learning that being closer did not require urgency. We moved together in silence, our steps guided by the same unspoken rhythm. Sometimes when I paused to rest my hand against a tree or to listen to the night, I could feel the slokin stop just behind me. Not crowding, not retreating, simply present. It was enough. The nights grew longer, and with them my walks stretched farther than usual. I did not mind. The forest seemed willing to carry me a little further each evening, offering gentle paths and soft ground beneath my boots. One night, however, I felt the weight of the day settle more heavily than before. It began as a familiar ache in my legs, the kind that comes not from injury, but from having carried oneself for a long time. I slowed my pace, letting my steps grow smaller, more careful. The slokin mirrored me, its long limbs adjusting without effort. We walked like that for a while, the forest quiet around us, until the ache deepened into something heavier, a weariness that asked to be acknowledged. I stopped. The Slowkin stopped as well. I rested my hands on my knees and breathed, letting the night air cool my skin. "Just a moment," I murmured, though I did not know whether the words were for myself or for the forest. When I straightened and tried to move again, my legs answered more slowly than I expected. I took one step, then another, and then I sat down. There was no alarm in it, no fear, just the clear understanding that I had reached the end of what my body would offer me for the night. I leaned back against the trunk of a nearby tree and allowed myself to rest fully, the moss cool beneath my hands. The forest did not react. It never does when someone listens to their limits. The Slowkin stood a short distance away, watching. I offered it a small smile. "It seems I won't be going much farther tonight," I said quietly. The Slowkin did not respond, but it did not leave. Instead, it shifted its weight, stepping closer. It lowered itself slightly, its large form moving with careful intention. I felt the ground tremble gently beneath its feet, steady and reassuring. It stopped beside me and waited. I tried again to stand, pushing myself up with effort. My legs trembled, then refused, settling me back against the tree. I laughed softly at myself. I suppose we all have our nights. The Slowkin tilted its head, watching closely. Then, very slowly, it knelt. I had not expected that. The Slowkin lowered itself until its shoulder was level with my chest. It did not touch me at first. It simply waited, offering its presence without demand. I hesitated only a moment before understanding. Carefully, I shifted my weight and rested my arm across its shoulder. The Slowkin was solid and warm, its moss-covered skin firm beneath my hand. It did not flinch. It did not rush. When I leaned further, it adjusted its stance, anchoring itself so that I could rise. Together, we stood. It took time, more time than most creatures would allow. But time is something the Slowkin understands well. Once I was upright, it remained still, letting me find my balance. Then, with gentle certainty, it took a single step forward. I followed. The journey back was slow, slower than any walk I had taken in Whispergrove before. Each step required attention. Each pause was long and necessary. The Slowkin did not mind. It moved at a pace that made no distinction between progress and rest. We stopped often, sometimes to let my legs recover, sometimes simply because the forest invited us to. The Slowkin never released its support. When I leaned more heavily, it steadied itself. When I felt stronger, it allowed a little more space, always adjusting, always present. The path seemed shorter than I remembered. Perhaps it always is when one is not walking alone. At last, the faint glow of the campfire appeared through the trees, warm and steady against the night. The Slowkin's steps slowed even further as we approached, as though it sensed that this part of the journey was meant for me alone. I rested my hand against its arm. "This is where I stop," I said quietly. "You've brought me home." The Slowkin remained still, its tall form outlined by the soft firelight. The warmth reached it there, flickering gently across the moss and bark of its body. For a long moment it did not move at all. I lowered myself carefully beside the fire, the familiar stones and embers welcoming me back. When I looked up again, the Slowkin had stepped closer, just enough to stand fully within the edge of the light. "Thank you," I said softly. The words felt small, but they were the right ones. I would not have made it without you. The slokin tilted its head slightly, as it had done before. Its breathing was slow, deep, steady. Then, with an effort that seemed to surprise even itself, it made a sound. Not loud, not practiced, just a single word, shaped carefully, as though it had been waiting a long time to try it. Friend, I smiled, warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the fire. Yes, I replied gently. Friend. The slokin stepped forward then, closing the last of the space between us. Its arms moved slowly, awkwardly, as though unsure of the motion. Then, very gently, it wrapped them around me. The embrace was careful and brief, solid and warm. There was no weight in it, no urgency, just presence. I rested my hand against its back. You are always welcome here, I said. You may walk with me again whenever you wish. There is no need to ask. The slokin held still for a moment longer, as if committing the words to memory. Then it released me and stepped back. Without another sound, it turned and began to walk toward the forest. Its movements were unhurried, familiar, peaceful. The firelight faded from its form as it passed between the trees until it was once again part of Whispergrove itself. I watched until I could no longer see it, then turned back to the fire. And the forest held on to that small friendship, the way it holds on to many quiet things. There are moments in Whispergrove when the forest chooses not to announce what waits ahead, not to conceal it, but to ensure it is found only by those already listening. It was during such a moment that I came upon the elvish settlement. I had been following a familiar path when it simply failed to continue as it always had. There was no barrier, no warning. Only the quiet certainty that the forest had decided I had walked far enough in one direction and not far enough in another. In the space where the path ended, the village was there, woven into the trees rather than built among them, its structures shaped from living wood and careful patience. It was early evening, not the sort that brings urgency, but the slower kind that suggests something has already begun to change. The light rested gently against bark and leaf, lingering rather than pressing onward, and the air held the last warmth of the day without insisting it be noticed. The elves noticed me at once, not with alarm and not with welcome. Their attention shifted as a whole, subtle and unified, like tall grass bending beneath a passing wind. A few paused in their work. Others straightened, listening more closely than before. No one reached for a weapon. No one smiled. That, more than anything, told me why I had been led there. I stopped where the path dissolved into soft ground and waited to be approached. It is rarely wise to step farther than one is invited, and forests tend to respect those who understand that distinction. An older elf came forward at last, his movements measured and unhurried. His hair had gone pale with age, though not white, and his eyes carried the particular steadiness of someone who had spent many years watching the same borders hold, and recently begun to notice them falter. "You are old Thomas," he said, not as a question. "I am," I replied. He inclined his head. "Then the forest has not abandoned us entirely." "I would not say that," I answered. "It rarely does things so decisively." He considered this, then gestured for me to follow. "Come," he said, "there is something you should see." The village revealed its troubles slowly. Nothing lay broken. No trees leaned at dangerous angles. The air held its warmth properly, and the light settled where it should. To an untrained eye, everything would have seemed exactly as intended. Children moved quietly between dwellings. Fires burned evenly. Water flowed where it always had. But as we walked, I felt it, the faint looseness at the edges of things. Sounds did not linger as long as they should. Shadows did not settle fully. The space between the trees felt slightly wider than before, as though the forest were holding itself at a careful distance, attentive but unwilling to draw closer. "The ward is thinning," the elf said quietly, as though naming it too loudly might hasten the process. "How long?" I asked. "Long enough that we can no longer pretend it will mend itself." The ward, as it turned out, was old. Older than most of those who now lived within its reach. It had not been raised by the elves themselves, but set in place generations ago by a human wizard, one who had known how to ask the forest's permission and how to accept its conditions without complaint. It was not meant to be permanent. Most things that are meant to last forever fail early. To renew it, the elf continued, we require two things: the knowledge of the one who bound it, and the anchor that was tied to it at its making. I stopped then, allowing the space between us to acknowledge the implication. "You do not have the anchor." "No," he said. "It was removed, not recently, long ago. At the time there was no reason to believe it would matter. And now the forest remembers where it was taken from. That too mattered." The wizard, I learned, had left the region many years earlier, not in anger and not chased away. He had simply gone where his work no longer pulled him back. The elves had sent for him more than once since then, but he did not answer summons, and he did not return for old favors. "He will listen to you," the elf said. "I would not be so certain," I replied. "He will," he said again gently, "because you know how to approach him without asking." There was little more to say after that. They chose one of their own to accompany me. an elf of quiet bearing, neither young nor particularly old, whose task would be to carry the anchor once it was found. He met my gaze with calm attentiveness, not eagerness and not fear. That was acceptable. We set out before night fully claimed the forest. The path we took was not difficult, but it was particular. It curved where straight ground lay open and narrowed where space allowed it to widen. More than once, the elf glanced toward routes that would have been quicker, only to correct himself without comment when I continued elsewhere. After some time, he spoke. "You have walked this part of the forest before." "Yes," I said. "It feels different to us now." "It often does," I replied, "when something has been waiting." The air cooled as we moved deeper. The sounds of the village fell away, replaced by the quieter exchanges of bark and leaf and distant water. Nothing followed us. Nothing hurried us onward. That was when I knew the forest had already noticed our purpose, and that when we reached the place where the anchor rested, it would not be our strength that decided whether we could take it. The forest grew quieter the farther we walked. Not emptier, never that, but more selective. Sounds arrived one at a time, chosen rather than scattered. A bird's call would carry, linger, and then be allowed to fade before another took its place. Even our footsteps seemed to wait for permission before settling into the ground. We did not speak much. The elf had learned quickly that silence was not something to be filled, and I had no reason to disturb it. When we stopped, it was because the forest suggested it. When we continued, it was because standing still had finished saying what it needed to say. It was near the end of the path's patience that the land began to fall away. The ground sloped gently at first, then more decisively, until the trees thinned and the ravine revealed itself, not dramatic, not sheer, but deep enough that one noticed the space beneath rather than the ground ahead. Moss clung to the stone walls in slow, careful patterns, and a thin ribbon of water traced its way along the bottom, too far below to be heard clearly. The anchor lay across that divide. A narrow shelf of rock curved out from the far wall, no wider than a careful stride, its surface worn smooth by time rather than use. Near its end, settled against the stone as though placed there deliberately, rested the object we had come to retrieve. It was unremarkable at first glance. Small, dense, wrapped in layers of old bindings whose purpose was no longer immediately clear. It did not glow. It did not hum. It did not call to us. But the air around it held a different weight, as though the place itself were aware of being approached. The elf drew in a breath beside me and stepped forward. The ground answered at once, not with movement, but with sound, a low, unsettled shifting beneath our feet, as though the stone had adjusted itself slightly out of alignment. A small cascade of grit fell from the ravine wall, striking rock below before disappearing into the distance. The elf stopped, tension settling into his shoulders. "This place," he began, "does not respond well to hurry," I finished. He looked at me then, frustration flickering briefly across his expression. The ward weakens even now. I know, I said, but this place knows nothing of that. I stepped onto the shelf first, slowly, letting my weight settle rather than press. The air tightened for a moment, then eased, like a breath released after careful consideration. I did not continue. Instead, I stood there and waited. The forest adjusted. Minutes passed. The elf shifted once, then stilled himself. The faint unrest beneath the stone softened, its complaint reduced to a distant murmur rather than an immediate objection. "This place does not deny passage," I said quietly. "It denies urgency." Understanding understood more easily when it was not chased. When I moved again, it was with the same unremarkable pace. The elf followed, matching my steps without effort now. His breathing slowed, his attention no longer fixed on the object ahead but on the ground beneath him. Together we crossed. At the far end of the shelf the anchor lay within reach. The elf hesitated, then knelt, lowering himself so his weight spread gently across the stone. Only then did he lift it, cradling it rather than gripping it. The ravine answered with a long, settling sound, not displeasure, but acknowledgement. The tension bled away from the air, warmth returning in small increments. Behind us, the shelf felt no narrower than it had before. We returned the same way we had come, unchallenged. It was some time later that the forest began to feel inhabited again. The wizard lived where paths forgot themselves. No markers led to his dwelling. No boundary announced his presence. One simply walked far enough into a part of the forest that had no interest in visitors, and if one was still welcome, the ground would allow the approach. He was older than when I had last seen him, though not in ways that weakened him. His hair had thinned, his movements slowed, but his eyes remained sharp, assessing not who we were, but why we had arrived. "You bring something that was meant to stay put," he said, before either of us spoke. "Yes," I replied. He looked at the anchor, then back to me. "And you bring it because it must move again." "For a time," I said. He exhaled slowly, more tired than annoyed. "I told them not to rely on it forever." "They did not," I answered. "They relied on it long enough to learn what it was protecting." That seemed to satisfy him. He took the anchor in his hands, turning it once, feeling the way it rested against his palms. "It will not hold the same way again," he said. "It was never meant to." "It does not need to," I replied. The work did not take long. He did not travel back with us. He did not need to. The forest carried the change as it was made, binding the ward anew through old paths of agreement and careful permission. The anchor warmed briefly, then cooled, its task complete. By the time we returned to the village, night had settled fully. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Sounds lingered again. Shadows lay properly at the roots of things. The space between the trees felt held rather than merely occupied. The elder elf met us where we entered. He did not ask questions. He did not inspect the anchor. He simply nodded once, as though something he had been listening for had finally answered. "You will stay," he said hopefully. "No," I replied. "There is nothing here that requires me." He inclined his head, accepting that without offense. I left before morning. The forest released me without ceremony, as it always does when business has been concluded properly. Behind me the ward held, not rigidly, not forcefully, but with the quiet assurance of something no longer being asked to do more than it should. Some protections are not meant to last forever. They are meant to endure long enough for those within them to learn when to stand, when to listen, and when to ask for help in the right way. Those lessons, at least, tend to remain. If you have sat by this fire before, you may remember the slokin. If you have not, then allow me to tell you just enough. The slokin is a being shaped by patience, tall and broad, with long arms that move carefully as though each motion carries meaning. Its skin looks as though it belongs to the forest itself, layered with textures like bark and stone, softened by patches of moss that seem to grow where they please. It does not speak much. Words come slowly to it, and when they do, they are chosen with great care. Slokin and I have known each other for a long time now, not in days or months, but in shared silence, in unspoken understanding. We have walked the same paths without walking together. We have rested in the same places without needing to explain why. It is the kind of friendship that does not require attention, only presence. That is why, when the forest shifted its weight beyond the circle of firelight that night, I felt no alarm, only recognition. I was tending the embers, listening to their low, steady sound when the air behind me grew fuller. Not colder, not darker, just occupied, as though something large and familiar had arrived and chosen to wait. I did not turn at once. In Whispergrove, it is polite to allow arrivals their own moment. After a time, I spoke softly. "You may come closer," I said. "The fire is gentle tonight." There was a long pause, the kind that might feel uncomfortable elsewhere, but here felt natural. Then came the sound of a single step, heavy yet careful, followed by another. The slokin emerged slowly from between the trees, stopping at the edge of the fire's warmth. The light touched it unevenly, catching on the curves of its form, settling into the moss along its shoulders and arms. It stood there still and quiet, just as it always had. I smiled. "It is good to see you again," I said. "I wondered when you might return." The slokin shifted its weight. Its deep-set eyes rested on me, calm and unreadable. Then, after what felt like a great deal of thought, it spoke. "Friend." The word was low and rough, shaped carefully, as though it had travelled a long way before finding its way out. but it was enough. It always was. I rose slowly and stepped closer, stopping where the fire warmed my boots. "You have not come for the warmth alone," I said gently. "Something troubles you." The Slokin did not answer. Instead, it extended one large hand toward me, palm open, empty. I studied it for a moment, then nodded. "You have lost something." The Slokin lowered its head slightly, not in sadness, in agreement. "You want me to help you find it," I said. Another slow nod. "Then show me where you last had it." We left the fire behind without ceremony. It would keep. It always did. The forest opened around us as we walked, roots and stones offering their places without resistance. The Slokin led, though only by a little, its steps measured and unhurried. I matched its pace easily. After some time, the trees thinned and the ground dipped gently inward. The air there felt familiar, pressed smooth by repeated visits. I sensed it even before the Slokin stopped. "This place matters to you," I said quietly. The Slokin knelt and touched the ground, its fingers brushing the moss as though greeting an old friend. Then it stood and stepped aside, allowing me to look more closely. It did not take long to see what it had noticed. Footprints, small ones. They moved away from the clearing in a loose, wandering pattern. Some were clear, others faded where the ground had softened beneath them. They did not speak of haste, only of quiet movement. "You are not the only one who walks gently here," I murmured. The Slokin watched me, waiting. "We can follow them," I said, "if you wish." It nodded once. The trail led us into a part of Whispergrove I had not visited before. The trees there grew closer together, their branches weaving overhead in soft, protective arcs. The ground glimmered faintly, marked by pale mushrooms and smooth stones that held a quiet glow of their own. Eventually, the footprints ended at the mouth of a small cave. It was not dark, nor deep. Its entrance curved inward like a resting place shaped slowly by time. Warm light flickered gently from within, and the sounds that reached us were not alarming. They were lively, soft voices, small movements, many beings sharing a space in careful harmony. The Slokin paused, uncertainty passing through its stillness. I rested my hand briefly against its arm. "Let us see," I said softly, quietly. Together we stepped inside. The cave opened into a rounded chamber, its walls smooth and pale. Dozens of small creatures moved about within, some feathered, some furred, some shaped like nothing I had ever seen before. They carried bits of stone and leaf, thread and twig, working with gentle focus. And there, resting carefully upon a bed of moss, was the small wooden sculpture the Slokin had lost. One of the creatures noticed us and froze. Others followed until the cave grew still. After a moment, a small, round creature stepped forward and lifted the sculpture with both hands. It held it out at once, without hesitation. "For you," it said softly. "We only borrowed it." The Slokin exhaled, a deep, relieved sound that settled the air around us. But before we could step forward, the creature added, "There is something we hoped you might help us with." The cave waited. The cave did not feel tense as we waited. It felt attentive. The small creatures did not rush to explain themselves. They shifted softly where they stood, their movements careful, as though they were aware of how sound carried in a shared space. One by one, they stepped aside, opening a narrow path toward the back of the chamber. "Come," the round creature said gently. "We will show you." Slokin did not move at once. It looked to me, then back to the sculpture still held carefully in the creature's hands. I nodded. "We are listening," I said. That was enough. We followed them through a low passage where the stone curved smoothly overhead. The air grew warmer as we went, not hot, but comfortably so, like the memory of sunlight stored in the earth. The ground beneath our feet changed from cool stone to packed soil, softened by time and many careful steps. At the end of the passage, the space widened again. The ceiling lifted just enough to allow us to stand comfortably, and there, resting in the center of the chamber, was the stone. It was larger than I had expected, not jagged or threatening, but old and heavy, rounded by years of stillness. It sat at a slight angle, as though it had shifted only recently, settling into a position it had not meant to take. The small creatures gathered around it, keeping a respectful distance. "It moved," one of them explained. "Only a little, but enough." Slokin stepped closer, placing one large hand against the surface of the stone. It did not push. It simply rested there, listening in its own way. I crouched beside it, feeling the ground with my palm. There was a faint warmth beneath the stone, not a heat that burned, but one that soothed, the kind that seeps slowly into tired hands and eases them open. "There is something beneath it," I said. The creatures nodded. "It has always been there. It keeps the cave gentle. When the nights grow long, it reminds us to rest." Slokin turned its head slightly, understanding, settling into its posture. "We can help," I said, "but we will not hurry." Slokin straightened and positioned itself carefully beside the stone. It planted its feet wide, steadying its weight. I moved to the other side, placing my hands where the rock curved inward just enough to offer purchase. We did not count. We did not signal. Slokin breathed in, slow and deep, and I matched it without thinking. Together we leaned into the stone, not with force but with patience. The rock resisted at first, as it had every right to do. It had been resting a long time. So we paused. The creatures waited with us, quiet and still. When we tried again, the stone shifted, only slightly, just enough to acknowledge us. We rested once more, letting the movement settle. Again, we leaned. This time, the stone rolled just enough to reveal what lay beneath it. The warmth reached us immediately. Nestled into a shallow hollow in the earth was a cluster of smooth, pale stones. They glowed faintly from within, their light soft and steady, like embers that never faded. I felt the warmth rise into my hands, easing the stiffness from my fingers. The creatures let out a collective breath. "It is awake again," one whispered. Slokin knelt carefully and touched one of the stones, its massive fingers impossibly gentle. The glow brightened slightly beneath its touch, then settled back into a calm rhythm. We left the stone where it rested. It had no desire to be moved further. It had only needed space to breathe again. The small creatures gathered around the hollow, their movements lighter now, their voices warmer. One of them approached Slokin, holding out the wooden sculpture once more. Slokin accepted it with both hands, drawing it close to its chest. Its shoulders eased, tension leaving them in a way that words never could. Another creature approached me, holding a small fragment of the glowing stone. "For you," it said, "to remember this place." I hesitated, then accepted it. The warmth was gentle, steady, and reassuring. We stayed a while longer, sharing quiet company in the cave. No one spoke much. There was nothing left to explain. Eventually, it was time to leave. The creatures escorted us back to the cave entrance, their soft lights fading behind us as we stepped once more into the forest. The night welcomed us without question. We walked together for a long time afterward. The path felt different now, not changed exactly, but settled, as though something had been returned to its proper place. At the edge of Whispergrove, where our paths always seemed to part, we stopped. "This is where I turn back," I said quietly. Slokin nodded. It held the sculpture carefully, then looked at me, its gaze steady and calm. "Friend," it said again. "Yes," I replied. "Friend." Slokin rested one large hand briefly against my shoulder, solid and warm, as though the moment wished to be remembered. Then it stepped back, turned, and began its slow walk into the forest, its form moving easily between the trees. I watched until it faded from sight, until the forest closed softly behind it and Whispergrove returned to its familiar stillness. Only then did I turn back toward the fire. There are times in Whispergrove when the forest seems to notice absence more readily than presence, not because something has been taken, but because something has not returned. On such days, paths feel slightly longer than they should. Birdsong arrives out of rhythm, and creatures pause as though listening for a sound that has not yet come back to them. I had learned to recognize those days. They often found me before I went looking for them. That morning, I was walking the eastern trail, the one that skirts the shallow hollows where small animals like to rest when the light grows warm and the air grows still. It is a gentle path, forgiving underfoot, shaped more by habit than intention. I walk it often, especially when the forest feels unsettled in a quiet way. The light filtered down through the canopy in thin, patient layers, resting on moss and bark without insistence. Dew still clung to the lower leaves, catching the brightness and holding it as though uncertain whether to let it go. I had just knelt to examine a set of tracks, small, light, recently made, when the forest shifted its attention. Not sharply, not in alarm. It simply waited. I straightened slowly, resting both hands atop my staff, and let my gaze follow the direction my senses were already turning toward. That was when I saw the tower. It stood where there had been no tower before, not hidden, not disguised, simply present, as though it had always belonged there, and the forest had merely neglected to mention it until now. It rose high among the trees, slender and pale, its stone softened by age it could not possibly have accumulated in so short a time. Vines curled lazily around its base and climbed upward without urgency, as if they had been given permission to do so. Small windows spiraled along its height, each glowing faintly with a warm, steady light. This was not a structure built to command attention. It was a place meant to be noticed when one was ready. I felt no warning from Whispergrove, no resistance, no tightening of the air that sometimes accompanies careless magic. Instead, the forest seemed curious, attentive, as though it too were trying to understand what had been misplaced. I approached slowly. The door stood open, not wide, not inviting, just open enough to suggest that knocking would be unnecessary. Inside, the tower was quiet, not empty, never empty, but calm, like a room where someone has stepped away briefly and expects to return. Shelves lined the curved walls, crowded with small objects rather than grand instruments, jars of seeds, bits of polished stone, bundles of herbs tied with care. The air smelled faintly of dried leaves and warm tea. At the centre stood a man, bent slightly over a low table. He did not startle when he noticed me. Instead, he let out a breath that sounded very much like relief. "You came," he said. "I was nearby," I replied, "and something here felt unfinished." He nodded quickly, as though this confirmed what he had hoped. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly it." He straightened, and I took him in properly then. His robes were layered and patched, more practical than ornamental. His hair was streaked with silver and refused to lie flat, as though it had grown accustomed to being tugged in thought. His eyes, though tired, were alert, too alert for someone who had slept well recently. "You are old Thomas," he said. "I am," I replied. He hesitated, then offered a small, almost embarrassed smile. "I was told," he said, "that when something living goes missing in Whispergrove, you are often the one who knows how to look for it." "I help where I can," I said. "What is it you've lost?" At that, his composure faltered. He reached into the folds of his sleeve and withdrew a small object wrapped carefully in cloth. When he unfolded it, a faint warmth touched the air between us. It was a collar, small, light, worn smooth by use and careful hands. A simple clasp had been repaired more than once. "My companion," he said quietly. "It follows me everywhere." Or it did. I studied the collar, not for enchantment, but for familiarity. "It didn't leave you?" I said. "No," he agreed. "It wandered." He gestured toward the walls of the tower, and only then did I truly see them. The portals. They were not violent or unstable. No crackling edges, no harsh light. Each one shimmered gently, like a doorway seen through water, its surface reflecting scenes that shifted slowly and without urgency. A quiet meadow beneath unfamiliar stars. A sunlit clearing filled with flowers I did not recognize. A narrow path winding through stone and mist. "I was experimenting," the wizard said, "carefully, briefly, just enough to observe." He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit born of too much thought and too little rest. "My companion has always been curious," he continued, "too curious. Before I noticed what it was doing, it had stepped through one of them." "And you followed," I said. He shook his head. "I couldn't," he admitted. "I panicked, and when I panic, I lose track of order." He looked at the portals again, his gaze skimming over them without settling. "I don't remember which one it chose," he said. "Only that it wasn't afraid." I considered this. "When did this happen?" I asked. "Yesterday," he replied. "Or perhaps the day before. Time feels uncooperative in here." "That's often the case," I said. He swallowed, then met my eyes. "I didn't open them all at once," he said quickly. "But once I realized I'd lost it, I thought perhaps if I retraced my steps—" You opened too many doors, I finished. He nodded, ashamed. Yes. The tower hummed faintly around us, the portals brushing against one another in subtle interference. Not dangerous, not yet, but restless, like thoughts that refuse to settle. I don't need you to fix them, he said. I only need help finding the right one. I studied the portals again, letting my attention drift rather than focus. What sort of creature is it? I asked. His face softened immediately. Small, he said. Quiet. It listens more than it speaks. Likes warm places. Hates sudden noise. I nodded once. And it trusts you, I said. Yes, he said. That's what worries me. I set my staff gently against the wall and stepped closer to the nearest portal, not to enter it, but to listen. Tell me, I said, which of these have you already ruled out? He hesitated. I didn't want to, he admitted. I was afraid of choosing wrong. I turned back to him. Finding something lost, I said, is rarely about knowing where it is. More often, it's about remembering where it wouldn't go. He took a slow breath. Then I am very glad you're here, he said. Outside, Whispergrove waited. I moved slowly among the portals, not to inspect them, but to feel how the tower responded to my presence. Magic has habits, much like animals do. It grows restless when stared at too intently and settles when allowed to exist without demand. The wizard hovered nearby, hands clasped together, watching me with the quiet hope of someone who has already exhausted every other option. These are all the places you opened? I asked. Yes, he replied, or at least all the ones I remember opening. That's enough, I said. He blinked. It is? It usually is. I stopped in front of a portal that shimmered with a pale green light. Within it, I could see a gently sloping hillside, grass bending beneath a slow-moving breeze. Nothing about it seemed remarkable. The wizard leaned closer. That one feels empty, he said. I don't think it's there. I nodded. And yet, I said, you looked at it first. He frowned. I did? You did, I replied. And then you looked away. He followed my gaze back to the portal, uncertainty flickering across his face. It felt too quiet, he said after a moment, as if nothing could be wrong there. That's often where frightened creatures go, I said, to places that don't ask anything of them. I moved on. The next portal glowed faintly gold, revealing a clearing scattered with unfamiliar flowers. The light within it pulsed gently, warm and inviting. The wizard smiled despite himself. I remember that one, he said. It was beautiful. Too beautiful, I said, and too bright. He sighed. Yes, he said. It would have hated that. We continued like this, one portal at a time. I asked simple questions, and the wizard answered without trying to impress or justify himself. Where does it like to sleep? What sound does it make when it's content? What frightens it most? With each answer, his shoulders relaxed a little. At last, we came to a portal he had not mentioned. It was narrower than the others, its edges less defined. The light within it was dimmer, shifting between shades of soft blue and grey. Inside, I could see a stretch of forest not unlike Whispergrove, though quieter somehow, as if the trees were holding their breath. The wizard stopped walking. That one, he said quietly. I didn't mean to open that one. I turned to him. Why not? He hesitated, then shook his head. It reminded me too much of home, he said, and I was afraid it wouldn't come back if it felt that. I studied the portal more closely. It didn't want adventure, I said. It wanted familiarity. The wizard's eyes grew damp, though he did not look away. Yes, he said. I think you're right. I rested a hand lightly against the edge of the portal. The surface rippled gently beneath my touch, neither resisting nor pulling me forward. This is the one, I said. He swallowed. Will you go in? He asked. Or should I? We'll go together, I replied. There's no need to rush it. He nodded, grateful. We stepped through. The air on the other side was cool and still, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. The forest there felt quieter than Whispergrove, but not hostile. Merely paused. The ground sloped gently downward, and between the trees I could hear the soft trickle of water. We did not call out. Creatures that have wandered do not respond well to being summoned. Instead, I crouched and examined the ground, letting my fingers brush lightly over the soil. There, I said softly. The tracks were small and light, barely pressing the earth. They led toward a cluster of stones near the stream. The wizard followed my gaze, hope flickering anew. It always liked the water, he whispered. We approached slowly. Near the stones, curled into a patch of moss warmed by lingering sunlight, lay the creature. It was smaller than I had imagined, fox-like but rounder, its fur dappled with faint, shifting patterns of light that glowed softly with each breath it took. Its ears twitched at our approach, but it did not flee. Instead, it lifted its head and regarded us calmly. The wizard froze. There you are, he murmured, voice trembling. The creature stood, stretched once, and padded toward him without hesitation. It pressed its head gently against his knee and made a low, contented sound. The wizard sank to the ground, laughter and relief mingling in his breath as he gathered it carefully into his arms. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have paid better attention. The creature merely settled more comfortably. I watched for a moment, then turned back toward the portal. We should go home, I said. The return was easier. The portal opened to us without resistance, and when we stepped back into the tower, the air felt lighter somehow. One by one, the other portals dimmed and faded, closing not with force but with relief, like doors finally allowed to rest. The wizard stood quietly at the center of the room, the creature perched on his shoulder. I won't open them again, he said. Not like this, I agreed. He smiled faintly. I think I only needed one place to be, he said. Outside, Whispergrove welcomed us back without ceremony. The tower seemed smaller now, content with its purpose fulfilled. The wizard walked with me to the edge of the trees. Thank you, he said, for finding what I couldn't. You knew where it was, I replied. You just needed help remembering. He nodded, holding his companion close. When I turned back toward the forest, the tower was already beginning to fade into familiarity, becoming just another place one might notice only when the time was right. I resumed my walk, letting the path carry me where it would. In Whispergrove, things are rarely lost forever. They are misplaced, misunderstood, or momentarily out of reach. And sometimes all they need to be found again is someone willing to look without urgency and walk without fear of choosing the wrong way. Those are the walks worth taking. That is the story of the wizard who searched far and wide, and of a wanderer who listened carefully enough to help set things right. Nothing was taken, nothing was forced. What was lost was returned gently when the moment was ready. I have left the tower behind me now, quiet and content, and followed the familiar paths back through Whispergrove. The journey is complete. All is in balance once more.